If you're new to marketing, you want to learn how to master looking at the big picture when planning out your marketing campaigns. Well, you're not going to want to miss this video. How are regular folks like you and I that aren't blessed with massive marketing budgets supposed to compete in spaces that take a ton of money, a ton of time, and a ton of resources, all while trying to stay sane? That's the question. And on this podcast, we're here to help you find answers. Welcome to the Marketing Stuff Podcast. I'm Maurice A. Davis, and I'm your host of the Marketing Stuff Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about how you look at the big picture of your marketing in order to make sure that you're accounting for all the things that can be hurting or helping your business and using that to create a marketing plan. So let's jump into it. I'm going to share my screen so we can get into this content. All right. So let's talk about the learning objectives for today's session. This is part 5 of a multi-part introduction to marketing series. So if you have not watched the other sections, you may want to pause, go to those other videos because these concepts are building on one another. And I do mention pieces when we get into this, right? Okay, so what are the learning objectives for this section? Number 1, we want to outline how customers, company, competitors, partners, and the physical environment impact our marketing strategy. We need to explain why marketers must consider the macro environment when they make decisions. We need to identify various social trends that impact marketing, and then we need to examine technological advances that influence marketers. So let's jump into the first one, outlining how customers, company, competitors, partners, and physical environment affect the marketing strategy. Good Lord.
Oh my God.
Okay, so this should actually say, and customers. Let's fix that. And customers. So this is essentially the first layer of your environment. And if you were watching the previous video, section 4, we talked a little bit about environment. And in future video, pestle analysis, we will talk about how you evaluate the environment in order to start building your marketing plan. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you check that video out once it's up. The 5 components. Let's talk about how they interact with one another. So in most cases, customers have a problem. Companies use their capabilities to create or solve problems. Then their competitors do the same thing to take away market share. Their corporate partners limit or expand the company's capability. And then the products we use actually impact the physical environment. Now, we do have to step back on this just a little bit because the way I've structured this diagram is that it looks like it's linear, but it's actually not. There's some back and forth, okay? And so when a customer has a problem and company A solves the problem, it actually creates another problem for the customer. An example could be like customers were like, hey, I don't want to sweep. All right, cool. We'll take care of that. And when they took care of it, it actually created a new problem because the robots were dying and they weren't returning to the charging station. And so the next iteration was, all right, we're going to make sure that they return to the charging station. Okay, cool. Now the new problem is now I have to try to remember to clean it when it returns to its charging station. So now there are versions and different vacuums and stuff that clean themselves. And so like, this is an iterative process. The customer has a problem, the company creates a solution. The customer's like, okay, that's great. But now this has exposed a new problem that I didn't even know that I had. Now the company has to go back and create a new solution or add on to their previous solution. That's how this process works. That's why we have to have version 2s of just about everything. You can't solve all the problems in version 1 because you don't even know what the problems are because the customer doesn't know what they are. The competitors are also doing the same thing. There's this push and pull of I create a solution and you're like, well, I can make it better. And then the customer's like, well, I like this better. And now there's this like triangular push and pull and everybody is exposing problems and adding capabilities and, exposing more problems. And so it's this constant back and forth. In the midst of that, we have our corporate partners that are expanding or contracting our current capabilities. So if I create a robot that cleans at home and let's say my partner is Apple, and you're an Apple user, that may expand my capability because now I can tap into the Apple system that you already have in your home. And so it advances my capabilities, right? Maybe now my robot knows when I eat dinner and it just automatically vacuums in the area that I was sitting because it assumes that I probably dropped some crumbs. That could be an expanded capability onto a simple product that now adds a layer of complexity that maybe wasn't considered before. Same thing like my workspace. Maybe because I'm plugged into the Google Home system, it knows that, you know what, Maurice just finished a 5-hour block of work. We don't know exactly what he did during that 5-hour block of work, but it's possible that he dropped some stuff on the floor, right? Maybe kicked in some dirt when he came in from outside. So we're going to sweep or we're going to vacuum. And because we have his tracking from his phone, we know the exact pattern that he walked into the house. And so the robot's just going to come in and it's going to vacuum that piece. Maybe it's called the targeted cleaning system, but that is an advancement to the current capabilities. And then we have how our products are being used. So the textbook gives a really great example. So I'm just going to use that. It talks about how swimsuits create microplastics. Swimsuits made out of nylons add microplastics into the water when they're washed and when they're being used. And so when we think about like this adds microplastics into the water, the fish are in the water, they consume microplastics, then you consume the fish. And so just the existence of these nylon swimsuits are slowly polluting the water with microplastics, right? So when we think about this goes back to being conscious marketers. We have to be mindful. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about with the conscious marketing, go back to video 4. And that whole section is about conscious marketing. We have to be mindful of the choices that we make with the products that we use and the products that we create because they have impacts on the physical environment that we live in, right? So this is talking about the planet. So now we have to understand why marketers must consider their microenvironment when they make decisions. Listen, the short answer is why we have to is because we're trying to get people that live in and engage in the greater environment or compose the greater environment to make decisions. And if we're not considerate of these components, and we're going to go through each one of the components, it will be next to impossible to get them to make decisions. Okay, so we talked a little bit about culture and why culture makes a critical impact on like ethical decision making. And if you're curious about that, go back to the previous video. But these are kind of the components. So when we think about what are the components that make up the macro environment, you have culture, demographics, social trends, technological changes and advances, economic situations, and then political and legal environment. And so we're going to unpack those a little bit, some more than others. But the first one that we're going to talk about is culture. So culture can be defined as all of the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, and the institutions of a population have been passed down from generation to generation. We have to understand that culture is made up of non-material and material aspects. And today we're only really going to talk about the non-material aspects. We're not going to get into the material aspects, only because material can be just a lot for us to cover. And I think the non-material for marketing purposes adds so much more richness to what we're doing. So that's why we're going to cover it. And so inside of our non-material, there are a few key pieces just to understand. So we have symbols, language, norms, rituals, and values. Okay. Symbols, language, norms, rituals, values. This was pulled directly from a research paper, a research article. If you want access to it, it will be inside of the vault. You can get that at MauriceADavis.com/vault. I also have an example of how language differs and how leveraging one language or viewing language from your perspective may actually cause barriers in understanding. This is a TikTok video. It's not like it's more funny than it is research, right? Okay, so these are all the aspects when we start talking about the different components of culture. All right, now let's move on to demographics. You have age, sex, income level, race, employment, location, homeownership, and level of education. Why do I have a star on sex? As time moves on, especially in the US, this is becoming harder to use as a targeting factor, okay? And I'm gonna bold it too. This is becoming harder to use as a targeting factor, especially if we're trying to be conscious marketers. The challenge here is even if a profile identifies someone as a specific sex, is it appropriate to use gendered language in your marketing? I'm not saying it is or it isn't, right? The other piece is as more people are identifying as more gender fluid, platforms are essentially opting them out of gender identity on the platforms. So the data is actually becoming less available, especially in the US. And then finally, you can have negative impacts with inappropriate targeting. If I am a marketer that deals in a group that has values that say you shouldn't gender me, the problem if you do, if you're not conscious of that, you actually hurt your brand more than you help. So this is just something to be aware of when you are using any of these factors, when you're talking about any of these factors. This is not saying that these are the only things that you can use. This is saying, look, these are the foundational levels, and you have to be careful as a marketing professional and really know your customer to know how to leverage each one of these aspects, okay? Hey, Maurice here, different Maurice than from the show that you're watching right now. If you want access to all the resources that I'm talking about and you don't want to have to write them down, in the notes below, you'll find a link. If you register there, I have included all the resources that I talk about inside of this free database. It's yours. So get back to the show. I hope you enjoy. All right, so identify the various social trends that impact marketing. First of all, what is a social trend? A trend represents what's popular on the collective community, on the minds of the collective community at a specific point in time. Why should marketers pay attention to social trends? Well, social trends can be early predictors of future desires or new norms. Okay, future desires, new norms. I probably should also say, or new core beliefs or values. This is the Ice Bucket Challenge. I wouldn't say this changed our beliefs or values, but it shifted how we paid attention to this particular chronic illness. So marketing professionals can also gain attention and market share if they use social trends and leverage them effectively. I would say this is a great example of leveraging a social trend effectively and using that in order to drive a mission. And then examine the technological advances that influence marketing. So there are 4 advances that I would say are heavily impacting marketing. So number 1 is artificial intelligence. If you've been paying attention at all, you've seen, ChatGPT, Google Bard, the next iteration of Google's AI, Google Genesis. These are all things that are going to change the way that marketers leverage artificial intelligence, but they're also going to change how people interact with the world. And it's that worldwide interaction that's really going to affect how we market our businesses. This image just really shows like Alexa and some integration that they're doing with like home appliances. Robotics, this can have an impact on people's work life. If we think about the assembly line, originally the assembly line was just people building cars, people building whatever. And then it became people and machines. And now a lot of it is machines. And so those people that would have originally had those jobs don't now. But it also means that the machines typically build with a higher level of overall precision. So that also changes, and speed. That changes how we can market our products, right? I can produce more cars with less margin of error. And so the quality should go up and time goes down. So that means cost goes down. So this is another component that we just have to be mindful of as marketers. How is robotics, artificial intelligence impacting our business? And then next is Internet of Things. I mentioned it before, the iRobot. So I'm not going to go back and talk about it again, but what are Internet of Things? It's usually physical objects that is connected to a network that passes data over through the internet to a server, right? It's the basic idea of Internet of Things. So your smartwatch, the iRobots. I actually have some lights in the studio that are connected to my phone. I would say that's part of Internet of Things. There's some data that's being passed back and forth. So something that is connected to the internet and passes data, we probably would toss it into the Internet of Things. And then finally, we have our privacy concerns. As privacy concerns continue to be on the rise, we have to understand that things like demographic data will become harder to access because of people's security preferences. And as we have less available targeting aspects from a demographic standpoint or from a behavioral standpoint, we have to be more creative about how we collect information to then interact with our consumers. There are some key components: inflation, currency exchange rates, and then interest rates. This chart kind of explains the interaction. So when we think about inflation, this is the constant increase in prices. So the impact here is that when prices go up, we can have a decline in buying power. Foreign currency fluctuations, changes in exchange rates, changes in exchange rate cause a shift in affordability. So this can be a dynamic shift. If we think about it from a country perspective, if your dollar is stronger than another country, then when you go to purchase something that is from another country, it costs you less total dollars for you to buy that same thing. If the inverse happens, then it takes more of your dollars to buy that thing. That impacts you as a marketer because it can change your supply chain. It can change the availability. It can change how affordable something is, right? And then interest rates. So this is the cost of borrowing money, especially if you sell a higher priced product that typically requires some sort of financing. So in the US, if you sell a home, somebody's going to probably finance that. If you sell cars, somebody's probably going to finance that. Higher priced appliances to middle lower class, they're probably going to finance it. And so these are situations where if the cost of borrowing money goes up, it is likely the demand for your product is going to go down because the affordability of the product has gone down. So again, the economic situation is highly dynamic, and we are very much simplifying by looking at it this way. But you have to think about, like, when these go up, when these change for the negative, the environment in which you are marketing your product has shifted for the negative. And I use shift on purpose because it's almost like you got to pick your graph up and then move it to the left or to the right. And this is getting into more economic theory. I'm not an economist. I'm just economically capable. All right. So
I am a strong and capable man.
Let's talk about the political and legal environment. There are tons of things that change in the political and legal environment that have an impact on marketing. One that probably has the easiest and most simple impact was 2003 Can Spam Act or Do Not Spam Law. And this reduced the amount of like unwanted emails. But there were marketing professionals that were just getting lists, tons of lists, and just blasting people with emails. And they were successful to some degree, right? Then you have 1995, the telemarketing sales rule regulated like fraudulent activities conducted by the telephone. So it changed how we could go about reaching people and using the telephone to do so. So there are tons of political changes that also have an impact on your industry. And you have to understand when you have these new acts, new laws come out, that may change the dynamic in which you can operate as a marketing professional. So you want to pay attention in the US, things like the FTC. You also want to pay attention to executive orders. Listen, the executive order can drop and totally change your business overnight. We recently had an executive order come down that changed the legal age of buying cigarettes. And if you sell cigarettes, that's a big deal. You just eliminate it, or not eliminate it, but made it much more challenging for a segment of my consumers to purchase my product. And so that means I have to make some adjustments as to how I go about marketing my business. All right, the next, responding to environments. If you want to be successful as a marketing professional, you have to be agile. You have to be willing to make the changes with the environments. If we just think about like, the Can Spam or Do Not Spam laws or the executive order that changed the legal age of when someone could buy. If your business, let's say 60% of your customers were that 18 to 19 range and the legal limit was changed to 21, you just lost 60% of your customers. You got two choices. You can change or you can die. Die. And that's it. And so in marketing, that can happen a lot. You can have algorithm changes that impacts your business disproportionately to maybe someone else's because of how you leverage the platform. You could have law changes that impact your business disproportionately because of how you leverage, because of your customer makeup, or because of how you leverage the gap in privacy. You can have environmental changes, right? That a law changes people's opinions about something that's happening that it didn't even directly impact the law itself. Right? Like you're good because you don't fall in that space, but this change has made people more aware of what's happening. And so you get impacted in the wake of it. So just be mindful, be ready to make these changes, and don't ever rely too much on one specific thing in order to build your marketing plan and to build your business. Outside of that, stay out here winning, y'all.